Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Coaching Outdoors podcast. Thank you for taking the time to listen in today, wherever you are in the world, whatever you're doing in the backdrop, be that maybe going for a walk, maybe driving. Welcome, and I hope you are as excited as we are about this conversation with Phil Banfield. So, Phil, if you could just give a super brief introduction to our listeners and watchers as to who you are, and then we have got plenty of time to dive more into the details in a moment.
Okay, good morning. Thanks so much for inviting me on the podcast. Thanks, Alex and Anna Marie. My name's Phil Banfield. I run a business called VentureField, which is really where I take people outside, coaching and facilitating and using the outdoors to really elevate people's performance, but also the organizations and businesses that they work in as well.
That's great, Phil. Thank you. And maybe just tell people where you are in the world right now.
So I'm actually in the Great Glen at the moment, in a room in a hostel between Loch Lochy and Loch Oik. And at the moment, the weather is good.
So I'm just down the road in Scottish terms, and the weather is awful, hence why I'm inside, which is a shame, really, because it was beautiful for the last few days. So diving into our first question, which we always ask our guests right at the very, very beginning of every single podcast, and we just feel like everybody really loves this question. We love it, and we feel like our guests love it too. So, Phil, could you tell us what's your earliest memory of being outdoors, and why do you love the outdoors so much?
Great, thank you. I think it's a good question, and it made me think. It didn't take long to come to me, really. I grew up in southeast London, in suburbia, so not the place, not the countryside. But what I knew right from an early age is that I love being outside. So I think growing up in a noisy place, we lived on a main road. My sort of retreat was to a tree in the garden. I used to go and sit in the tree in the garden, and I could overlook other gardens. I could see other kids playing in other gardens and speak to them and wave to them. And then we moved when I was 8 years old to still suburban area, but a bit of a bigger house and a bigger garden, and it wasn't on a main road. I used to spend time in the tree, which was a silver birch there, perhaps to get away from my sisters, perhaps to get away from family. My mum did suffer from depression the whole of our childhood, and at times that was quite difficult with how she coped with things. So I think for me, it was a little place to escape. But my real highlight was about a mile down the road was some woods. And where we lived, it was suburban, so lots and lots of houses. But these woods, I never really knew who managed them, who looked after them, but they were owned obviously by the local council. And these woods were called Harvington Woods. They're still there today. And it was probably 2 or 3 acres of land, all woodland with a stream running through it. And that was just a place that became my place. I would get home from school, do my homework, out there every evening on my bike, entered some races that used to run through these woods as well, cycling races. But I also used to love taking friends down there and showing them my special place, Harvington Woods.
It's always fascinating to hear our guests' connection, particularly to trees, and that real deep relationship that as a child you can really build. Growing up, I know for me, time almost seemed to be like an alternate dimension and lasts forever. And the trees had been there for even longer. So they were real ancient, wise beings. So I think sometimes just taking that moment to pause and reflect back to this kind of childlike awe and wonder and the relationship that we would create with trees, and actually revisiting that as an adult as well can be quite refreshing and enlightening. And as you've moved through your life, you have this simple underpinning philosophy that shapes ultimately how you live, and then how that then flows into your business. So it would be great just to get a little insight into, what that is and maybe where it stemmed from.
Yeah, I think my philosophy really is that we're here for a short period of time. and how do we fulfill our potential? I think what's difficult at times is trying to discover what your potential is. Is that in your career? Is that you personally? And it may change over time. But I think for me, it's how do I fulfill my potential? But also, how do I help other people fulfill their potential? And I've been very lucky in my career, or fortunate to had some amazing experiences which have fulfilled my potential at times, but also worked with some people where I've been able to help them, whether it's gain a promotion, whether it's get a new job, or whether it's just to see things slightly differently.
I really, do you know, I was going to go back to the trees bit there as well. I was away with the thoughts of trees whilst you were talking about potential, and just the thought of the two things together, even actually, because, you know, we've got trees have a huge amount of potential, don't they? And some grow big, huge, and some stay tiny little saplings. And I just love the idea of having that philosophy where you want to help people to reach their potential. And I remember once being interviewed for an HR job, and my dad said to me, whatever you do, when they say, why do you want this job? Never say because you like helping people, because they go, oh, that's what everyone says, that's why everyone works in HR. And he was like, talk about potential. And even back then, when I was like, I don't know, probably 20, for me, it was all about potential as well. And I really like that kind of philosophy in life. And it is a simple philosophy, but as you said, it can be quite hard for people to understand what their own potential is. And if they've got somebody who really helps them to identify that, and then identify how they can actually work their way through, whether it's, yeah, as you said, whether it's work or whether it's home life or wherever it is, it's really nice to sort of have somebody who's focused on other people's, helping other people reach their potential. So just thinking back a little bit, we're still sort of thinking back kind of your kind of route to where you are now, and threading through your career. And obviously, you know, you've probably, well, you have had a very varied career. You were telling us earlier on that you trained as a lawyer, in fact. But what are the key milestones that you would pick out? Just one or two really key milestones that you'd pick out that really kind of have got you to where you are in the world of coaching and outdoor coaching.
I think that there's a lot actually, and it's interesting how they sort of now these sort of different pathways or roots of the tree, or whatever you want to call it, they're all fitting together, really, flowing together. I think one that my father was a scout leader when I was younger. He was very busy. He ran his business probably 7 days a week, but he still managed to run a scout group and was a group scout leader. So inherently, I think I was just always outside doing things. And I think one of the things about this point about helping people achieve their potential is, you know, the different scout leaders that I had, or cub leaders, whoever, they were always encouraging young people to do their best, to do better, to improve in such a positive way. I had two elderly friends who were like adopted grandparents when I was a teenager. When I was 16, they bought me membership for the National Trust because they could see I loved the outdoors. They could see I loved history. They loved history and the outdoors. So that was an amazing gift as a 16-year-old to receive that. I couldn't drive, I couldn't visit the places, but just you'd get the manual. And I remember reading the National Trust manual and looking through it, thinking, well, where am I going to go once I can drive? And then I think a massive experience for me to this day, the biggest experience of my life still so far was I did a degree in geology. It wasn't originally by design that I did that degree, but at the end of the second year, one of the things that you do as a geologist is create an independent map. It's called your independent mapping project. And we had the opportunity of either spending time in the UK or Europe. And I remember there were 5 places for Zimbabwe. And I was like, I have to go there. I don't know anything about Africa. I have to go. So 6 of us put our name in the hat, and literally our lecturer did pull names out of the hat, and I was the 5th one to be chosen. We all felt really sorry for the 6th one who didn't go, but I was very lucky to be going. And what was amazing, whether because I'd spent a lot of time outside, but two of us were in the north of the country, 2 in the south, and they put me on my own in the middle of the country, located next to a population of 300 locals. I lived in a tent on the edge of the bush. And again, some of the things for me were, there were a group of 4 little boys who used to come around every afternoon to see me when I came back from the bush. And I taught them English, and they taught me Shona, their language, just by drawing little pictures. It was amazing. Every day they would come, but also it's just amazing. If you're spending every single day going out into the bush, I'd leave at 6 in the morning before it got too hot, be back by about 3 o'clock, and I suppose it was just amazing. Every day I saw baboon, I saw cheetah spoor, so I knew the cheetah had been there overnight. I saw crocodiles in the river. Just an amazing experience. So I suppose that was really profound. And it really, nature and the outdoors has never left me. And I think this point about trees are absolutely, for me, just so important. They're my favorite object in the landscape. They're all different. They've witnessed so much. And bizarrely, on a personal side of things, which may seem a little bit odd, but we had a family business for 90 years, which was a timber business. So the smell of wood was around us all the time because my dad smelt of wood all day long. And bizarrely, we traced our family tree back to the 1700s. And an ancestor of ours was a carpenter in the 1700s working with wood. So there's something, I don't know whether there's some connection. I'm still fascinated by wood to this day. I think wood is very wise. It can flex. There's an amazing story by John Muir, which I heard when I was in Yosemite. He one day climbed to the top of a pine tree because he wanted to understand what it was like being a tree in a storm. And he hung on for dear life to the top of this tree, and it flexed several meters each way and was creaking, but it never broke. And I do think there's some huge sort of trees have a lot of wisdom. They're strong, they're malleable, they observe. And again, I know from your past podcasts, a lot of people have talked about the hidden history of trees, or the hidden story of trees. I can't remember the name. And that book is a fascinating book as well.
Thank you for just a brief insight into a couple of your kind of earlier memories that have shaped your journey so far. And that trip to Africa just sounds so formative in your years, and really living in England and then going beyond that and being exposed to different cultures. It's just such a perspective shift. Absolutely huge. So yeah, not surprised that you still carry that with you now. And at some point along the way, your business emerged. And it would be interesting just to hear a little bit about how that came into being,
Sure.
And then the story behind it, VentureField. Because when we're having conversations with coaches and they're setting up their business, a part of it is it's like this business development side. Well, what's the business going to be called? What's the logo going to be? What's my service? What's my offering? So yeah, if you could just share a little bit of an insight into how you developed your business and the story behind that.
Okay, so my business, again, probably influenced by lots of things that I've done in my life. I think I worked in a corporate world of food and drink industry, working for large companies, large, big FMCG companies, but also smaller companies, which is unusual. I moved from large to small, which I think was great, because the smaller companies, I was able to bring the structure and rigor of large companies. But when I worked for larger companies, I was able to bring some of the sort of entrepreneurial spirit and flexibility of smaller companies. How I actually set the business up formally was I worked for a company. I was giving them some advice on what they needed to do with some very large retail customers we had. They didn't like the advice I gave them, and actually they let me go from my job, which was the biggest shock of my life. And I thought, well, what do I do now? I think having 3 generations before me of my father, grandfather, and great grandfather who ran their own business, and my great grandfather set the business up. I thought, well, I'll have a go at being self-employed. Maybe that's what's meant to be. So I decided that I would be a consultant helping businesses work with the same large customers. And that business changed quite a bit over time. And I got involved with interim work, helping run companies, set companies up from outside the UK who wanted to be in the UK. And I suppose really I worked as a commercial consultant. My whole sort of raison d'etre was driving commercial performance. The name VentureField came from, again, a few different experiences. Originally, it was going to be a sort of holiday company. I did a trip to Mexico across the mountains and watched, I think it was with Exodus or Explore. And I thought, I want to do this, but in the UK. So VentureField, it's about, venture, we're out in the field. I've always done a lot of photography, and I didn't run that holiday business. But I started doing photography, and I thought I'd call my photography, rather than Phil Banfield photography, I'll call it VentureField photography. It sounds great. And so when I set the business up, I thought, well, what am I going to call this business? And I thought, well, I'll call it VentureField because I've got the name in my mind already. What does VentureField mean? Well, it's venture, it's field. My surname is Banfield. We'd had a family business which had Banfield in the name. My uncle set up a business which was dealing with imaging and electron microscopes. He called that microfield. So VentureField fit in that way. I think the other thing for me is that I believe everybody in their life should have some sort of venture or adventure. So whether that's they have their own business, whether that's having a child, whether that's having an amazing holiday somewhere we've never been before. I think if we leave and never had something that has tested us a little bit. So venture came from that sort of venture spirit. And field, I think for me, feels expansive. It's open. The horizon is beyond the field somewhere. And field is also an area of expertise. So it's really all of those things. I also, since thinking about this podcast, I think there's a place, and I think there's a place called the venture field. And I would like everybody in their lives, if they can, to enter the venture field. And the venture field is positive, it's expansive, it's very green, it's nature. It's probably where your potential can be unleashed, where it can be elevated. So yeah, as I'm saying that to you now, I'm tingling. The hairs are sticking up on the back of my neck. It feels to me so compelling and exciting, and I think I'd like everybody to go to the venture field. And then the shift I think I made from just corporate consulting was that throughout the time as a consultant, clients I worked for said, well, can you help us do some training here? Our team don't know this, they don't understand this. Or whilst you're working for us, can you hand over to us? And this was everything from teams, but also founders. I helped founders set up businesses. So they asked me to coach them. How do they speak to a large retailer? How do they speak to an investor? So I'd always done quite a lot of sort of coaching and learning and development. So one of the things I did 14 years ago, probably a year into setting the business up, was trained as a coach. And coach people along the way. And really about 5 years ago, I made the decision, rather than just commercial consulting, which I still do a bit of, my business would move to more about elevating performance of people, businesses and organizations. So that strapline of driving commercial performance has now become elevating performance, which I know is a little bit woolly, but to me, actually, that's what it's about. How can I help elevate the performance of anybody in the organization? Yeah, that's where the name came from. I have a logo which I call the Leap, and the Leap has come, actually, it's brilliant. It's come from several people's ideas. But I had this idea of a program where I wanted to take people outdoors, potentially into the mountains. So I was talking to a friend of mine. I said, I like a mountain logo. There are lots of mountain logos. So my logo now has 3 little arrows, which actually look like a mountain at the top. There is a sort of viewpoint symbol, lines like you're looking out. But also what it for me signifies is the 3 arrows that signify the mountain are actually about progress, about moving forward, or about elevating. And that part of the logo, which is like a viewpoint, is the light bulb moment. It's when you've leapt, you've got to a new level of whether that's consciousness or understanding your skills, you've taken the leap. So that's where that comes from, and you know, I'm really pleased with everything that signifies.
I think the one thing that whether our watchers and our listeners are watching or listening to you, they can really feel and sense just your love for your business and your ethos, and you've really thought about it and you've really evolved it over time. I love the idea of the VentureField being a place. And the play on words is just wonderful. I absolutely love it. Because I was thinking about it myself when I was thinking about our podcast today, and I was like, I wonder where this has actually come from, because there's so many ways you can use both those words and then using them together as well. I just think it's fascinating. And your logo, I have to say, I was looking at it, and interestingly, the only reason, if it was blue, I would have seen it as a boat coming towards me.
Okay.
The front of a boat with the sun behind on the very bow of the boat. But because it was green, I was like, well, it's a mountain. But my eyes kept kind of swapping between the two, which was really interesting, actually. And I found that quite fascinating. And I was just sat there looking at it for ages, kind of tilting my head and going, this is a really great logo. You can see it from so many different ways. And I just love the idea of whether it's the sun or whether it's the viewpoint at the top or whether it's reaching your, you know, the pinnacle and then moving up again. It's one of those things. I always look at logos and think, oh, I wonder why they designed it that way. And actually being able to talk to somebody who's thought about their logo properly, it really does encapsulate, I think, what you were saying about the arrows and the people's potential and
Something I'll just
reaching
pick up on there. Now, I hadn't looked at it and ever considered the boat. Now I see that. I see a Viking boat.
Yeah,
the
that's
proud
exactly what.
Viking boat.
Yeah, that's
And
exactly
again,
what.
what's fascinating about that is I've spent a lot of time in Scandinavia and especially Norway, and I'm fascinated by the Vikings. And on my bookshelf at home, I have lots and lots of books. Interestingly, one of the things that I'm sort of coming to a place now is about, you know, how do I help people pioneer? And one of the things I love about the Vikings, you know, they were the first really documented pioneers. They, you know, the things they did, the technology they had, and the places they went were amazing. So you've just added, for me, a totally new dimension to that logo. So thank you for that.
And that's fascinating as well, because you see things based on your own experiences, don't you? My husband is absolutely fascinated with the Vikings, and he's a woodworker, and he makes lots of Viking inspired things out of wood, and we think he's got Viking blood in him as well. I mean, he's very tall, bright blue eyes, dark hair, that sort of thing. So so again, it's just, I guess it's what comes to you visually based on what your experiences are around you. We're always watching Viking programs, and you know, it's a fascinating way. But yeah, that's really fascinating. So you could turn it blue even, and then you could have two logos, or brown. But yeah, now diving a little bit deeper into your actual coaching methodology. You've got what you call your Wayfarer methodology within your coaching. Can you tell us a bit about that and what that involves and what's inspired that?
Yeah, so I think really, probably more than coaching, I'm much more moving to a facilitation place. As I say, trained as a coach 14 years ago, not done a huge amount of coaching formally, done it informally when I've worked for clients. And one of the reasons was, I think, and this is partly why I'm in this place now, is that there are so many coaches. And what I feel about now with outdoor coaching, you know, it's something that's been in my mind for a while. I know a friend actually who's a counselor, and he's been counseling people outside for probably 15 to 20 years. And suddenly when I discovered there's other people coaching outdoors was just amazing. It is a thing. So for me, in terms of that methodology of the wayfinding, it's very much really, again, navigating the outdoors. I think there's so much to see. It's so reassuring. It's so beautiful. There's so much inspiration around us. So what I do with that coaching is very much ask people, if we normally walk somewhere that I know or been to before, so we don't get completely lost. But I would ask them, where should we go at this junction? We've got a left turn and a right turn. What is it appeals to you about the choice you've made? If we go the left turn, well, what is it? And they would normally tell me something about, you know, what they've seen or what's appealing about it, why they want to follow that route. And again, with a lot of my work, it's based on using metaphors. So what do they see? There's a few other things. There's a bit of science behind this as well. I've read a lot about navigation. I've trained as a mountain leader, so navigation is very important there. But there's a great book called Wayfinding by Michael Bond. And he talks, is pretty much the whole book is about science. And he looks at all of the different work that's done on how people navigate. And I think what's fascinating is that navigation stimulates our brain. If we follow in our car, we use a sat nav and follow the sat nav, or our phone if we walk around somewhere, we're just following a line. So our navigation part of our brain isn't working out. A hippocampus doesn't fire. There's a part of our brain that's our following part of our brain, and that fires to follow. But the hippocampus, it has no activity in it. It's pretty much brain dead if we're following. So getting people to look at what they see, a landmark, some leaves on the floor, a log, a branch, some water. They're having to think about what they're seeing and navigate. So therefore, it has to have some significance to them. And sometimes you might have to tease out that significance and find out what that is. But then I would say, well, we've taken this path. And again, when we get to, get further down the path, what do you see? Let's stop here. What does this tree mean to you? Or what do you see around you? And how do you connect with it? So again, really sort of being fascinated, this soft fascination, staring into the distance without focusing, but what comes to you, what do you see? And really trying to use what people see as a route through the challenges they're facing at the time or where they want to go. Recently, I did something with a group in the North Downs near where I live, and just got them to walk from A to B and B to A. And what did they see? And on both those journeys, they will see something very, very different. They'll see the same items potentially, but they'll see other items, other trees, or something from a different angle that they hadn't seen before. So their brain is firing totally differently on the return journey than the outward journey. So I think it's how do we use that to understand where we are, where do we want to go? And I'll give an example. Yesterday, I went for a walk near where I'm staying, and on the way back, I took a route a bit cross country through some woodland, which was amazing. It was beautiful. It's by the Caledonian Canal. But I did think at one point, am I on the right route back? I didn't take a map with me. And what I saw was amazing. At around about head height in front of me on a branch was some tufts of the coat of a deer on the tree. I looked at that and thought, someone's been here before. And it's actually maybe a human, but there's actually definitely deer been here recently because they've left some of their fur. I don't know if it's fur or their coat on the tree. So they've been here before, and they're pretty wise. They know where they're going. So I'm going to continue with my route because I think they know where they're going because they're looking for water or food. So I think, that to me, this navigation and an interesting fact as well, reading that book is that if we can navigate our landscape around us with or without a map, we are better at navigating social situations because our number one survival technique is not necessarily food and water. We need those. If we can find people, they are going to help us with food and water or tell us where it is. So again, there's some work being done that those who are better at navigating their physical environment are better at navigating their social environment. So, there's a parallel here. If you can navigate the different challenges you see along the way or the different landscape, then, quite possibly you're going to be able to navigate better in the relationship with your workplace, family, etc.
Just before we go on to the next questions, that's also a really great book. I'm just looking on my bookshelf. It's called The Walker's Guide to Outdoor Clues and Cues. And it's actually all about that. So about reading the environment around you, but it's not to the point of being a trekker or a tracker of animals, but just, what does the sky look like? Has it changed? And there's a couple of them. There's a gentleman who writes them and he's got 3 or 4 books, and some of them are just about the stars, some of them are about the weather. But what you were saying there is you're absolutely right. If you see where the animals are going, then there's likely to be water around, at least, if nothing else. At this time of year, though, I'm not sure I'd necessarily follow deer because it's rutting season, especially in the Great Glen, the red deer up in the Great Glen. But yeah, I think that's just as you were saying that, I was just looking on my bookshelf thinking there's another one called How to Read the Stars. And again, there's some really great books in the series that this gentleman writes. I'll put it into the resources at the end when we put this on our website as well, because that is the kind of thing. And I think it's fascinating what you were saying there between the link between if you can navigate the world around you, you are better than potentially navigating social situations as well. So that's really, really fascinating. Sorry to jump in there. I know I just suddenly thought I suddenly saw the book on the bookshelf as you were talking there, and it really sparked that thought off.
I think, and for me, as just hearing Phil talk, it was all about this being in relationship with our landscape. And actually, in the past, we were inherently rooted and we knew the land like the back of our hands. And we knew where the water was and where the traps were, and we could read the stars and we could pick up on these minute cues that the book that Alex has just shared about. And, you know, for me, I've been on the 6-month immersion program down in Devon called The Old Way that Robin Bowman, who is a former guest on the podcast, co-facilitates and co-founded. And this is very much getting back to our place as humans within the landscape and how do we navigate space, place, and time. And actually, as coaches, how do we work with our clients to help them navigate, you know, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever other factor that you feel called to work within, how do they navigate ultimately through life to elevate their potential? And for you within your work, I understand that you've got different coaching experiences. There's the journey, the mountain, and my mountain. And from what I understand, you're then distilling down this essence into these different experiences. And it would just be interesting to maybe have an insight into each of them and how they maybe complement and what the differences are.
Yeah, so I'll start with the mountain because that's where I started first of all. So a few years ago, I trained to be what's called a North Downs ambassador. I was running photography courses in the North Downs, and there was an opportunity to be trained to take people out there formally. So with my geology background, interest in history, interest in photography, this seemed an obvious thing to do. So I was trained and assessed, and that was great. On the back of that, I decided, well, I like that assessment process. And the guy who assessed me said, you should train to be a mountain leader, which is something I'd always wanted to do. So I trained to be a mountain leader about 4 years ago now in Snowdonia. And what I saw when I was firstly doing the training and then through the period between the training and the assessment was everything I was seeing that we were being taught and how we were being assessed was all about leadership. It was self-leadership. It was leadership of other people, everything from setting the direction and navigating, but also for caring for the people. How are they feeling? Are they tired? Are they hungry? Are they slow? This was really 360 leadership, really looking after the people. And I looked at this and thought, this is what I've seen in organizations and businesses all my life, but we're doing it here on the side of a mountain. And then the next thing happened was that between the training and the assessment, you have to do 20 quality mountain days. So I took lots of people into the mountains who'd never been before, quite a lot of them never been. And the thing I found every time was people said, they told me a reason why they couldn't get to the top of the mountain. They were hungry, they were tired, they were nervous, they were scared of heights. They had every reason why they couldn't. And a lot of them were friends. And every single one of them, with a bit of encouragement, coaching, support, they made it to the summit. And what I saw was dramatic at the summit, that every time someone reached the summit, they were firstly a feeling of elation at the achievement and the physical exercise. But secondly, they just had a totally different perspective of the world. And the phrase I used with them is, at this point, you are at the highest point on the planet. And they would say to me, well, what do you mean? There's Everest. And no, at this point on the planet, you're at the pinnacle. You've reached the highest point that can be. And they were like, wow, have I really? I'm like, yes, you have. And that was amazing for people. And what I realized is on the way as you came down the mountain that It's how do you turn this elation into what I call experiential validation? They've had an amazing experience. How can I use that and help people to raise their confidence, to empower them? So the genesis of this idea of the mountain came, and really that what I do with the mountain is this is aimed at teams and organizations. It's to look at where they are in their business now, whether that could be they need to change their business, they need to do something different. They're trying to hit 2025 sales numbers next year and are planning for that, or they may be working on a 5 to 10-year strategy. And what I really use is the metaphor of a mountain to help them with that process. So firstly, before we go onto the mountainside, we will map their landscape, their business landscape, their organization, their business with their competition. Where do you sit? And we start to map this, and we physically map a diagram of the different heights of the mountains. We look at sort of roughly 8 to 10 enablers, and we rank those in terms of their difficulty to achieve or their strength in that area. And then we spend some time inside. The next day we go up a mountain. And a lot of people choose Snowdon, but there are lots of other interesting mountains to go up. And I use that journey up the mountain to ask the team to discuss some of the enablers that we'd sort of revealed the day before. So as they're walking, they're going to be more creative, and they start to think about, things slightly differently. And then we stop and we discuss these enablers, and then we continue and we discuss some more. And I change the subjects around that people have. I ask them to look at the physical landscape in front of them from the mountain. How does your organization fit into this landscape? Where do you want to be within it? We reach the summit. People are given some creative tasks to do along the way as well. But they also carry some items, which I'm not going to tell you what they are, and they are different actually for every group. And these are items, some of them are really great and some of them are not so great. But these items represent the things that they've told me, either in the interviews I've done with team members in the weeks before or the day before. So some of them, they're like, I can't believe I had to carry this all day with me. And I said, well, that signifies this in your organization. That's what you're doing all day long. You've told me this is a problem in your organization. And then there are other things which they take for granted in their organization. And when they open that box, oh, wow, we've got one of those. Yes, because you told me in your business, this means this. So we have quite a bit of fun with those boxes. And then we come back down, we'll celebrate that we've all been to the top of the mountain. So this potentially, if we've got to the top of the mountain, you can achieve 2025. You can achieve the 5-year strategy, the 10-year strategy. And then we spend some time really looking at what does their new landscape look like and what is that route they're going to navigate to get to their new summit. So that's what the mountain's about. My mountain is very similar, but it's for personal challenges or personal life changes if you want a new life path. So this came about because 14 years ago I got divorced. Toughest thing I've ever done. Really couldn't get my head around it and cope with it. So I went away for a week on a program actually run by an organization called the Ministry of Inspiration, to really work out how I was going to cope with this situation. Other people on the program had all sorts of other challenges. So my mountain is really, it could be any personal challenge, whether someone's trying to understand the effect of bereavement. It could be they're changing jobs, etc. So that it runs a very similar format to the mountain, but we also have some other guest speakers who come in and help facilitate, whether we talk about nutrition, whether we have some yoga, whether we have some confidence coaching, depending on what the group needs. The journey is slightly different. The journey is, rather than perhaps a leadership program, the journey is much more about teams, team communication and alignment. And the journey is in lowland areas. So I'm based near the North Downs, the Surrey Hills. So it's predominantly areas around London, which are lowland. And this came about for two reasons. One is that businesses in London said to me, the mountains are too far away for us. Can we do something close by? So it's very practical. And secondly, it's perhaps not so much about leaders who are setting 5-year or 10-year strategy. This is about the team and how they work together. So again, we go on a walking journey. lots of different exercises along the way. Some of those are small exercises. There's one program I've written where it actually is an all-day exercise that could end up in an almighty negotiation or in a fantastic collaboration. And obviously, we want people to end up working towards the latter. But they've really got skin in the game on that, and the teams will become, in a positive way, quite competitive. So that's what those different programs are.
It's such variety, and you've obviously really thought about what somebody need, sort of the experiences they could have to really get those insights. And I love the idea of taking items. I'd really love to know what they are. I'd love to know what mine would be. In fact, I'm thinking now, ooh, this is interesting. And when you were saying about, people saying, I can't get to the top, I can't get to the top. I love mountain walking, but I am that person. And my husband walks alongside me. I'm like, oh, I'm this. And then you get to the next peak and you're like, oh my God, the mountain's still going. It's like another peak, and then you get hidden peaks. But when I get to the top, I'm always that person. I'm the one running around going, yeah, this is really exciting. And when you come down, you're full of energy. I am that person. But I will always make it to the top unless something major happens. And I just love that kind of concept and that idea of, encouraging people and giving them the confidence as well to make it, all the way to the top of whatever that mountain is they choose to go up. Now, our listeners absolutely love insights and stories, the kind of experiences that you and your clients have had, obviously fully confidential. But if you could share one or two stories of client experiences that really kind of highlight some of what you've said, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, so I've got two examples I can give you. One is from a program, My Mountain program. So that was individuals who didn't know each other before they came on the program, and they all had some potential life challenge or something in their lives they're trying to deal with. And there's one lady, we'll call her Rachel, who attended, and she was very skeptical, doesn't like doing personal development, self-development and coaching. And she made it very clear to me she was skeptical about what we're doing. But, to be fair to her, she got stuck in and worked through the process. One of the things, and again, strictly as a coach, I probably shouldn't do this, and I'm sure I'll get a rap over the knuckles from many coaches out there. I was uncomfortable with some of the things she was saying about how she was going to live her life for the next 15 years. There was things she was going to do. She was going to put her life on hold for about the next 15 years before she started living it. And we discovered what was driving that behind. And but I could not let it go. And again, this is where I say I probably stepped over that line of coaching and more to facilitating to a result. But I challenged her quite hard on that. And we then took our walk up Snowdon. And again, I would, as we're discussing, I'd bring up this putting off things for 15 years, whether I was using the metaphor of the journey we're on and where we got to, and look at the fantastic view here. If you stay where you are for the next 15 years, you're not going to see these views, these opportunities, these fantastic conversations that we're having. And at the end of the program, I ran this for 4 days, and at the end we wrapped up, and I asked everybody in the group, would you give me some sort of testimonial, a video testimonial? And everybody said yes. Except for Rachel said, no, I'm not doing it. And I thought, well, I'm never going to get a testimonial from her. She's very skeptical. She said, I'm not doing it until I get home. I said, oh, maybe I will get it. I probably won't. Anyway, that evening I get a video through, and she's filmed it in her garden, and she explains how skeptical she is. And she says to me, the program and what Phil has done has absolutely changed my life. And I'm like, wow. Really? Okay. Wow. Amazing. 6 weeks later, one of the things I do with all my programs, we have a follow-up 4 to 6 weeks later, any organization, because I want the learning or the development or the insight or the action to stick. So 6 weeks later, we all had a call. And, Rachel told us about something that had happened in her life, which normally with her old mindset, her old worldview, it would have broken her world would have collapsed. And she'd done the opposite of what she would always do. And actually, grabbed an opportunity and gone with it. And again, she said to me, I would not have done this before the program. So again, I'm like, wow, I have to keep doing this. But then the real icing on the cake came earlier this year when I was actually away abroad for a trip. And I sat down next to someone at dinner who said to me, "What do you do?" And I explained what I did. And they said to me, this lady said to me, "Have you met Rachel?" And I said, "Yes." And she was on my program last year. She came on the My Mountain Experience. She said, "You have changed her life. You've absolutely changed her life. Her approach to life is now completely different." So I really believe in this power of we did a lot of work also connecting with nature. We spent some time in woodland as well as the mountain, and we did some grounding exercises. But I really believe there's a power of, it's not just about the mountain, it's being in nature and connecting with it. I believe facilitated her to shift her life, and potentially me prodding her a little bit more than I probably should have done as a coach. But I just could see such an opportunity for her. I had to do it. So that for me, when I see that result, I think I have to keep doing this. I have to keep doing this, and I believe in this power of the mountains to help facilitate us. On that point, something I just want to mention as well, because it has come up as a concern from people, is that, you know, going up a mountain is not inclusive. Do we need oxygen tanks? Do we need ropes, etc.? One of the things for me is that there's twofold here. If I'm taking people up the mountain, if it's a fantastic group who's really got to know each other, they would say to me, "We're concerned about person over here and their fitness or their etc. Phil, can you change the experience?" That's an amazing group, would do that. But myself as a mountain leader, you know, I'm trained, firstly, safety number one. Safety is paramount. Number two is everybody's got to have a great day out. The third priority for me is that people learn, they change, they elevate their performance, whatever it is. But that's not going to happen unless people are safe and feel comfortable and are enjoying themselves. So one of the things, I would never take anybody anywhere which I don't believe that they can make it to the summit. And if something happened along the way where they couldn't make it to the summit, we will change the journey so that the group or the person achieves something still, and not in a condescending way. It will be managed. So that's something I wanted to raise at this point, because that is a concern that gets raised quite a lot. I think my second experience I'd like to talk about was, just a couple of weeks ago, I had a week where I took two different groups up, one to do their 5-year strategy planning, and one to do their planning for 2025. And I will talk about just briefly the strategy planning group. They really weren't sure what to expect. And we did everything I talked about on the mountain, and the exercises, the items they carried. And what is interesting, I've seen with one of the items they carry, which potentially they may not want to take with them in their future journeys, how different teams deal with this. So this particular team, actually, this was on their 2025 planning. What they said was, actually, this object, we're going to leave it on the mountainside, but we're not just going to toss it away. We're going to leave it because actually it's served us well to this point. And they almost ceremoniously left it on the mountain and all paid it respect, because they said it's got us to where we are today. And I just found that fascinating, that they're leaving the past behind, but they respected their past. They were cognizant it was a building block of where they are today, but the future does lie somewhere else. So, they really thought about this item when they unwrapped the box and saw it. So again, very, very powerful of how different groups. I have had a group before who've tossed the item away and said, "Never want to see it again." So that was an interesting example.
Oh, I'm loving the symbolism in this and people's behavioral responses and how it comes through. And really grateful for you signposting this piece around risk and being in the mountains and the respect that is needed. Everyone comes with different experience from their past, and for some, the mountains can be a daunting, unknown, scary place if you've never been there before. And for myself, qualified mountain leader back in the military, having led expeditions all around the world, it's looking beyond my perspective and stepping into my client's shoes and really not taking for granted my way of being and seeing, and being able to be in that moment and to respond as you so eloquently described. And part of that being in that position on the mountain, you know, as a guide, as a mountain leader, as a coach, as a facilitator, you're wearing many different hats. And ultimately it's how do we have our clients in that stretch zone, so that there is a shift, there is a change, though it's not too far, or else it's not conducive to the bigger picture. Though looking ahead, you are launching a new venture for VentureField. And I've caught snippets of this on your LinkedIn posts. 4 seasons in one day. So curious as to what this entails. And then also, if you've got any other projects or events that you've got going on, it would be great to have a little bit of an insight into them too.
So 4 seasons in one day has come about working with a friend of mine, Catherine Nichols, who's also an outdoor coach, happens to live locally to where I am. And she's very, very much about open heart, open mind. And I lead walks at the end of each month locally. We just walk for an hour and a half, very gentle walks, which are coaching walks, which I'll talk about in a second. So Catherine knows me from the walks that I lead. And we decided, well, you know, what can we do that, rather than just an isolated 2 or 3 days on a mountain or a walk at the end of the month, what can we do that really helps people, you know, nurture people, develop people over the year, so it's not just a quick fix. But also the angle I wanted to bring to it, probably from my commercial background, is this has also got to work for the organization or the business that these people belong to, if we're doing it for organizations. So we really said it's about you know, a year of well-being for people and businesses. So what we've sort of dovetailed together is that we will take people on a walk each season. So it's going to start in January next year, and we will meet every quarter in each season. We will do the same walk each time. And to start off with, this is going to be in the North Downs, in Surrey. And we will do the same walk, but on that walk, there are going to be, as we've already talked about, landmarks, locations, views, and we will discuss how people are feeling at those points along the way. In between that session, and this walk will last most of the day. Again, there'll be some exercises, grounding exercises, connection exercises, connection with each other, connection with nature, what they're feeling, what they're sensing, but also where they are in their business at that time, what's happening in their business, you know, what are they trying to achieve in their business, either personally in terms of what's the role they're doing, how well are they doing it, or what is the organization trying to achieve and how do they fit in with that and their colleagues. So all of these things will be discussed. We would meet again in the next quarter in the next season. So we would meet in the spring. Between times, we will have some online intervention. So we will have you know, a session, interactive webinar session where we check in with everybody and see the progress they're making. But when we meet again in the next season, we will do the same journey. And of course, because of the seasons have changed, those same landmarks will have changed. How will the people have changed in that time? So we will go through how they're feeling, how their organization is doing, how they're performing, how the organization is performing, and then what needs to be adjusted before we meet in the next season. And again, we'll support them halfway through the season. And there's potentially the opportunity to have some one-to-one coaching as well if people want. But it's really about traveling through the whole year, witnessing the seasons, connecting with the different seasons, and what does that mean for you and the organization you're in. I'm quite into, from my background working with startups and helping founders with businesses, you know, investors are always looking for a return on investment. It's difficult in the world of coaching. But again, we wanted to bring that angle in rather than say we're just taking people out for their own personal well-being and development. It's how does this relate back to the organization they're in? So the organization also wins. So that's what that program is about. And Catherine and I will be delivering that together starting in January.
The seasons is just one of my favorite things to focus on in nature. And interestingly, when I did the research that I published with Jonathan Passmore, a lot of the people who I spoke to, that was one of the things that they really talked about in terms of the benefits of being outdoors, especially if they had coaching over a year rather than just 1 or 2 sessions, was about the change in season and being able to understand change and looking at the system around them and really think about not as a scary thing, but as a cyclical thing, as nature changes constantly, whether it's throughout the day, whether it's throughout the seasons. And I think that's the really fascinating thing for me as well. The picture behind me, for anyone who's watching, this is the view out of the window I'm looking at the moment. Doesn't look like this at the moment though. And one of the things when we moved to Scotland was the seasons. When you're down south and you live in a cul-de-sac off a cul-de-sac off a cul-de-sac, all you can see around you is buildings. There's a tree here and there and you can see the leaves change colour. But when you live 400 feet up a mountain and you've got the expanse in front of you and you can actually see the trees on the mountain changing colour over a period of a couple of weeks, then you can see the ice coming in and the snow coming in, and even seeing where the sun sets and rises throughout the year as well. And just it really brings home the expanse of nature, but also the cyclical nature. So every year it does the same thing, but just slightly differently because there are different trees or there are different animals around. And I love that link to seasons. It's just, I think anyone who hasn't really thought about that, just sitting there and thinking about, okay, what's your favorite season and why? Which season does really resonates with you? For me, it's autumn. It's always been autumn. I absolutely love autumn. And my husband does too, interestingly. So it's just where and why does it resonate with you? What's your personal connection with nature? Anna and I talk about personal connection with nature all the time, and about understanding ourselves, not just as coaches, but as human beings that we are nature, aren't we? So that's fascinating. I'm going to follow you very closely on LinkedIn around that and see what comes out of that, because that to me really is a really fascinating way of connecting with what you're doing and focusing on change, but in a very different way to the corporate world of change management and that sort of thing. Now, unfortunately, we're going to have to start drawing this to a close because, oh my God, we could talk to you for hours, Phil. This has just been absolutely wonderful. The insights you're sharing, the stories, the experiences, just the way that you have evolved what you're doing and the thought that's gone into it. It's just phenomenal. And I think our listeners and our watchers are going to absolutely love this episode. But kind of bringing it around, kind of closing it off a little bit, just for today, what resources would you recommend for people who maybe want to kind of get an idea of your world of outdoor coaching or where you've come from and how you've got where you are?
Yeah, there's lots. I read a lot. If we'd been doing this and I'd been at home, my whole wall behind me in my office at home is covered in shelves and shelves of books. So lots and lots of different books. But I suppose before I start on books, I would say first one is the Adventure Mind Conference, which will be taking place in November this year. This was originally set up by a good friend of mine, Belinda Kirk. This is taking place at the University of Lancaster. And this is really, Belinda has also written a book called Adventure Mind. And really the premise behind this book is how adventure can help us with our mental health and help us, whether it's equipping us to face challenges, to soothe us. So that this conference is all about how adventure can help mental health. Down from not just the mental, but the physiological side of things as well. So I'd recommend that conference to anyone. Unfortunately, this year I can't make it, but I would normally be there. For me, also, something like the Kendal Mountain Festival in Kendal again in November, which is taking place straight after the Adventure Mind Conference. For inspiration, the stories, the people you meet, the people who are doing adventurous stuff around the world. And also I'd say the Banff Film Festival, which tours all over the UK. It's called the Banff Mountain Film Festival, but it's not all about mountains. There's just so much amazing stuff that people are doing, whether it's a five minute film or whether it's a half an hour film. So I'd recommend getting out and seeing some of those. You see people who are out there trying things and doing things, which is amazing. I think in terms of other books that I've read over the last few years, since really researching this area, Grounded by Ruth Allen. I think that's been mentioned in another podcast. I love that book. I love photography, a keen photographer myself, so it's full of lots of activities and insight, but also great photography. The Nature Fix by Florence Williams, which is all about the science of how spending time in nature is great for us. Mountains of the Mind by Robert McFarlane, who's written a lot of books about landscapes and the outdoors, but this book is particularly about why, as human beings, do we want to conquer and climb mountains? What's in it? What is that about? I think a fantastic little book I read at New Year last year is called A Year in the Woods by Colin Elford. And Colin, I think it's in Dorset. He is a gamekeeper, and he talks about all of the seasons where he's out there as a gamekeeper, and his job is to cull the deer and squirrels. But what's amazing, he has the philosophy of really indigenous people that I've read about in other parts of the world. He really respects the wildlife. He is culling the deer really for the good of nature and for the deer in the longer term. And, the decision making he goes through to when he's going to cull the deer or not, very, very respectful, but wonderful descriptions of him leaving each morning. Totally outside of this, I'd say a book that came to me yesterday when I was thinking about this podcast is Danny, the Champion of the World by Roald Dahl. Probably my favorite book as a child. Just again, it's all in the woods. They're out in the woods. He's exploring the woods with his dad. His dad's walking back late at night. As a child, I think more and more that was a big influence on me. Just that book. He was just always in the woods. And then I think the final one I put this on LinkedIn last week. Primate Change by Professor Vibar Cregan-Reid is not about nature connection. It's about how the world we've created is recreating us and changing us, and it's all about our physiology and the things that we're doing which are perhaps not so good for our body, the clothes we wear, the fact that we sit in chairs. Just a fascinating book full of insights and facts. So I think those are the primary resources, but also just getting out for a walk or sitting in the garden for a bit, just observing at this time of year the leaves falling. That to me is an amazing resource in itself.
That's a really great insight into some really, really great resources there. Thank you.
And just leading on there from the Kendal Mountain Festival, this is something that for me, it's been an annual pilgrimage since 2009 and really transformative from when I left the military. I saw Dan Beaumont, who'd cycled around the world, and that then inspired me to go on my own adventure to cycle down New Zealand. So these people are truly inspirational. And going this year, I've got tickets to go and see Ruth Allen, who you mentioned her book Grounded. She's got another book out at the moment, Weathering, and really interested to go. And I think Paul and I are going to go and try and catch that together. So yeah, Counterpart Film Festival, it's huge, and the literacy part of it is absolutely phenomenal. Another book I'm keen to check out is Wild Service. I can't remember who has written it, but a real diversity, and it's not just the kind of mountain adventure kind of that classic. It's much more subtle and nuanced and more in relationship with the environment and nature. So definitely recommend checking that out. But Phil, ultimately, how can our listeners discover more about you and your work and connect?
Yeah, so my website for my business is venturefield.com, all one word, lowercase. I'm on LinkedIn. I think Phil Banfield is where you find me on LinkedIn. I also have an Instagram account, which is VentureField as well. So yeah, that's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. We were really keen to get you on the podcast. I remember you sat very much up at the front at Henley for our event. looking super keen. And as soon as we asked for volunteers, that because we were on a manhunt, you were there with your hand up and came and handed over your card. So really delighted that we were able to get you on the podcast. And listeners, watchers, as ever, we are always on the hunt for more guests, particularly from around the world, different backgrounds. We would love to hear more people to share their story and ultimately how they got into outdoor coaching and partnering with nature for their coaching conversation. So please do comment. And we would love to know how your thoughts about this episode. What has maybe really resonated with you? What is your key takeaways? Please feel free to pop in the chat. And if you think someone would love this podcast, please do share. We are spreading across the world at an amazing rate, and there is always more people who would benefit from listening into the stories that our guests kindly take the time to share. And another one which a guest mentioned literally yesterday, so we'll cite this to Clemens, is that if you're listening on Spotify, would you do us a favor and maybe just like or rate? Because again, that really helps with our rankings to help spread the world across the internet, and more people can ultimately find us, which would be amazing. So one more piece before we disappear. Clearly, we're still riding the wave of excitement from the Coaching Outdoors live at Henley Business School in July. And we are in October, even so. It was such an amazing event, and it was so much fun meeting people. And that was at the heart of it. It was all about meeting people, connecting and learning from each other. So the event next year is happening. It's Thursday the 19th, Friday the 20th of June. So it's a 2-day event. You asked, we listened. There is going to be more speakers, more workshop, more time, more connections, more amazing food, all in the glorious grounds of the Greenlands campus in Henley. And tickets, by the time you're listening, will be on sale. We're not entirely sure when this is going to be released, but tickets will go on sale on the 10th of October 2024, and the early bird is live for a month. So snap it up, and then it will have a slight increase, but ultimately hope to see you there. So if you are a first-time listener for today, thank you for discovering us, and hopefully you can now go back and listen to all the other amazing guests that we have had and learn from them. If you're a regular, thank you so much for being a regular. And again, would love to hear from you about your comments and your thoughts. So that is it from me. And a big thank you to Phil for taking the time and sharing his story.
Thank you so much. I think there's just one thing I'd like to add. This is a quote which I found a little while ago, which I actually wrote from a book. I copied it from a book when I was 20. And it's very strange that how now this is almost how I see my role with coaching and facilitating people. But I wrote it when I was 20, living in the bush in Zimbabwe. And it says, I wander I am, a worldwide roamer, thinker, reflector, deliverer of wisdom. And that's how much I very much see my job now. I don't have the wisdom, but if I can help people find their inner wisdom to help them improve their lives and ultimately elevate their performance, then I've done a good job. Thanks very much.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network,
and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
thanks so much in advance for your support.